The Breakdown.
May This Keep You Safe from Harm by Offroad Minivan. This is the Hudson Valley Quartet's second studio album, arriving the 23rd of June via Tooth and Nail Records. May This Keep You Safe from Harm consists of 12 tracks, clocks in at above the 45-minute mark. It's north of that, and is the much anticipated follow-up to 2020's debut LP, Swan Dive.
I was going to say immediate context, but it feels like you've covered a lot of this in your notes. Do you want to kind of maybe fill in some of the blanks here before we kind of dive in?
Who are Offroad Minivan?
Precisely.
Well, you know him, you love him. Ryan Tuck O'Leary, of course, from Fit for a King. This is his side project of sorts that keeps continuing to take on a life of its own in a really impressive way. Obviously, this is album number 2 at this point. This record itself is sort of just a little bit of context here around just the album title. A quote from Ryan: "When my grandfather joined the military and was going off to war, my grandma gave him a Bible with a metal cover," which is funny because immediately I think of just like a deathcore logo where it should say Bible.
It was actually like somebody covering a Pantera song on it.
On the front, it said, "May this keep you safe from harm. Even if you got shot in the heart, the Bible would protect you. When I first started touring, different family members gave me mementos to keep safe while on the road. The Bible was for my grandmother. Now I've got it tattooed on my chest, those words, so I don't have to bring the original with me. All of this is about the preservation of time. It's a way to document some of the most fragile moments and share the delicate, untouched, vulnerable side of myself." All of this being Offroad Minivan, being this record that maybe we haven't experienced from Fit for a King. It's the other swing of the pendulum, and I think that kind of perfectly encapsulates what Offroad Minivan and what this record, May This Keep You Safe from Harm, is or intends to be.
Yeah.
And boy, do we deliver on that.
Yeah, the only thing I wanted to add before we continue on here is the note about the individual sort of added in like song caps that are more, they almost work more as like transitions from like song to song, honestly.
Yeah, well, so I figured that would have kind of worked itself in naturally throughout.
Well, I only bring it up
review.
because I had made a note to myself where I wasn't entirely sure what it was or what drove it or what the nature of it was. So this sort of like provided some context into like me providing my feelings for this record because I didn't have this awareness.
So specifically those notes, because, that's part of like a bigger promotional piece. And I was reading through it. Specifically, those little voice clips that you hear are members of Ryan's family. They could be his grandmother, his
brothers, sisters,
whatever,
cousins, mother, father,
niece,
so yeah,
nephew. And we interlace all of those voice notes throughout the album. And that's sort of like where that preservation of time note comes into play.
Yeah, and it's interesting because like nostalgia was something that like it was a feeling that I felt like I really got from this record, and part of it
like
was
sonically
driven
initially, right?
Yeah, like part of it was initially driven by the fact that this band kind of has like a mid to early emo style to them that was like very reminiscent of bands like Armor for Sleep or even like The Starting Line.
Thrice Fair?
I don't hate Thrice. Like there's a little something there as well. I think early Thrice had a little bit more of a rock edge to them that I think this doesn't.
It's funny.
This for me
Thrice
kind
now,
of
not
exists
back in the
more
day.
of like an Anne Berlin-esque style to me, where it has a little more It has like the dire sadness of emo, but with a little bit more of like a pop presentation. Even something like, you know, the more slow ballady songs from like a Taking Back Sunday, you know,
Yeah.
sort of like removed of like their pop punk sensibilities and stuff like that.
Slightly more like mature approach.
So it has like a 2004 aesthetic to the entirety of it, and you kind of you take that and
got
you
a 2004 gloss to it.
and you marry it to the fact that what this album is sort of doing is existing as a time capsule. I like that it sort of works this nostalgia on multiple fronts.
Yeah, and it's a lot more like I love like the personal aspect of it because you could have done the same thing with just a bunch of random voice notes from or you know clips from whatever that you pulled off of YouTube from like just whatever you find on that website, but like this is reminiscent of
all
like
sorts of things on that website, bro. It's crazy the rabbit holes I fall into.
This is like when Lucas Woodland put his fucking grandma on that last Holding Absence album.
Yeah, I like
know?
that personal note, obviously.
Yeah.
I like when, again, and we mentioned it kind of earlier on in the last review, these personal touches, like I cannot exaggerate how much they mean to me and my ability to connect to a record, having heard so many similarly styled bands and artists. You know what I'm at the point where I almost feel that I really need bands to give me something that is a part of them that really connects me to them as an artist, because I've already heard the presentation of love, loss, and sadness and struggle and hopeful/hopelessness presented in a myriad of like general ways.
What's crazy about this album is it almost feels like Tuck specifically heard you screaming that into the void.
And I did when we were in the green room together that one time, and I'm glad he took notes.
This album, and Tuck mentions like intentionally bearing all and being vulnerable on here, and like we really deliver on that. Every song on here in that promo came with sort of like a behind the scenes as to what the song is about and why it's about that and so on and so forth. And a lot of these songs are about like, you know, cutting toxic people out of your life or the death of a loved one or a close friend, specifically the song Cheerleader. Once you have that context of who they are singing about, like they mention them by name on the track, and what that person meant to them in their life. Like, forgive me if I'm wrong, it was Victoria or Veronica, one of the two names, followed up by like, you led me to the stage, which is like where I found, you know, these aren't exactly the lyrics themselves, but it's a sentiment of like,
yes.
you know, you led me to the stage and that's where I found my voice or whatever. And it's like, man, that's a window into Tuck's soul. And this entire album, if anything, really opened my eyes to Tuck as just an artist. And, you know, there's obviously more parts to this band. It's a quartet, right? So there's other members, and I think that they're all delivering. But, like, as far as subject matter goes, lyrics, vocals, all that,
I think
really opens my eyes to the talent contained within that one specific being, in the sense that, like, man, if you thought Tuck from Fit for a King was a one-trick pony, you're sadly mistaken.
He can do more than spin.
Like, listen to the entirety of this album and like, man, I've got a newfound respect for him.
Yeah, 100%. I'm with you there. I think
that's coming from someone who didn't hear the last record, by the way. I believe you did.
I did hear the last album. It did not connect to me in the same way that this one did, and I think that this is a case of sort of artist growth really shining through here. I know we were kind of talking for a moment there about, you know, maybe not specifically secluding this to one singular individual. I will say that, like, I think the overall songwriting does a very good job of like bringing out the emotional sort of weight in a lot of like the wording and the lyrics that are found throughout this record. Just so take that, and then kind of like also this band's ability to really capture the style of music that they're doing, as well as the artists who were doing it at the time. I think of a song like Victim Complex, and just I'm really sort of like enamored with that band's ability to not just write a really good post-hardcore song, but write a really good post-hardcore song that feels like it was pulled from a very specific era, and it could have stood like toe-to-toe with the songs of that era. Victim Complex, I really enjoyed. I think The Beacon is another song that immediately stood out to me, specifically for like the vocal delivery in the chorus.
A lot of good choruses on here throughout.
But the song that I thought like shined above all else, personally, was Commitment Issues. For me, it's like the track from this album. I think what I really like about this album overall is that, like, with all the additional context that I've been like given sort of like early on here, I've sort of like found my adorations like growing for it,
Building.
Yeah. So overall, I think I would settle somewhere in a like 3.5, that there's a lot here to love. But I don't know if like ultimately I'll think back of this record as like one of my favorites of the year, but it was at the very least, like at the bare minimum, it's one of the more interesting voices of the year, where like maybe I don't love every song, but overall what we're attempting to do here is a lot more interesting than I think I even initially thought, and then compared to a lot of other things I've heard this year. Like I think this record can sort of like, you know, maybe I'll look and I'll compare it to everything else I've heard this year, and maybe I don't love it quite as much as a lot of those other records, but I think when I look at it by itself, I'll think of it as a success.
I think I'm slightly higher on it. I think I'm inclined to give it a 4, just with all that context. The fact that, like, yes, it's not reinventing the wheel, but like it's doing what I always ask albums to do, which has been a topic this episode, where I just want it to be a very personal experience, and we really deliver on that in that respect, in that regard. And it really makes me look at an artist differently than I did. Like, this album makes me look at the artist differently than I did coming into the the listening experience. And certainly don't get that every time you go into an album. I don't know. I was just sort of I was really surprised about this record. I expected to like it. The more I learned about it, the more time I spent with it, the more I really, really enjoyed it. So right now I'm at a 4.
Okay.